What's up guys, Bismarck's here, also known as Matheus Simões, and today I bring you the very first voiceover of 2018. I talked about this on Monday's video, but what you are watching right now is a review, a spoilers review, as you can see from the title. So I don't know how you've managed to do that, but if you haven't watched The Last Jedi yet, please don't watch this review. And as you've guessed it, it's a review of the latest Star Wars movie, The Last Jedi, that came out last month on the 14th of December of 2017. I explained the whole circumstance as to why I'm posting this review so late on Monday's video, so watch that video if you are curious. But long story short, I watched the movie on the midnight premiere 1 month ago, but was only able to post this review this week. I watched it multiple times after and saw a great many other reviews as well, so know that this is not a completely original or really a first moment opinion, but one that has developed since I first saw the movie. One last thing before I start, I am young, having completed 18 years of age only 2 weeks ago, so I wasn't able to experience Star Wars in its true, original, authentic form, as I hadn't been born yet. I didn't even experience the prequels in the movie theater, because I was too small when those came out. But because of my father, a Star Wars fan himself, I really fell in love with the Star Wars universe in my childhood and early teens, and that love only really developed throughout the years into the big fan that I am today for Star Wars. Therefore, the only movie that I did experience in the theater, hyped just like everyone else, was The Force Awakens, and not this one, The Last Jedi. Alright, enough of the introduction. Without any further ado, let me just start by saying that I enjoyed The Last Jedi, as it is surely an epic movie. In my opinion, it is not in any way a bad movie, but it does have many problems, mostly regarding cinematic choices. When I first saw it, I left the theater after the midnight premiere pretty awestruck in a positive manner. I thought it was a great movie then, but my multiple other viewings showed me the many problems of the movie. One of those problems were the underworking of some characters, and a topic related to that, which is disappointing character deaths. One example which particularly got to me was the death of Admiral Akbar. I really liked him as a character, and like it or not, he is an iconic part of the Star Wars universe, even a meme at that, and he died with no explanation or really nothing. He died off screen and nobody really would have noticed if it wasn't for one of the characters pointing it out. By the way, that whole sequence where the resistance leaders get blown out of the ship, I thought it was all just terrible, as the whole resistance loses its leaders really abruptly and really without any reason, and it has the whole stupid Leia Superman bullshit flying through space that comes later, and where she gets blown out of the bridge but still somehow survives, and then supposedly uses the force to fly through space and got on the ship. I get that you're trying to show that Leia still has the force, but in my opinion it was the worst scene of the movie, and it really made me cringe. It was done in a really bad way. It made no sense. I know the whole scene made no sense. I know they had to present the lack of evil resolve in the character of Kylo Ren somehow, and that scene at least accomplished that, I'll give it that. But I still felt it was very rushed, killing off really important characters just like that. I think this sequence, or a similar one, could have been done way after in the movie, killing the resistance leaders and potentially Leia, since unfortunately Carrie Fisher won't be able to be a part of episode 9. So that whole sequence, big thumbs down for me. Moving on to the next character, and this is no surprise to anyone, but I really felt that Captain Phasma was underworked. She really is the Boba Fett 2.0, only she doesn't even have the same punchy one-liners as him, definitely not having the same impact as he did in the original trilogy. Obviously, she's really underworked. She almost gets no screen time on both movies. She didn't even get that much on The Force Awakens, and then dies on the first battle sequence we see of her. Was a very interesting character in my opinion, and it was even a symbol for feminism from what I understand, and she was pretty much wasted in this movie. Now on to the most criticized parts of the movie that I've seen. Let's talk about the death of Snoke. Look, I actually enjoyed the twist in Snoke's death scene. I thought it was really Star Wars, for the lack of a better word, with Kylo betraying his master. It does rhyme, as George Lucas said that all Star Wars movies should, with previous Star Wars stories. But I just wish there had been something more for the character of Snoke. Either more character development, which is the better option since it was greatly missing, or at least a couple more interactions between Rey and the big baddie which Snoke was made out to be. You didn't even need to confirm any fan theories. He could be a new character, I don't really care, but at least a developed character. Supposed to be this ultimate bad guy, super powerful, Snoke that can force push and turn people to the dark side across the galaxy, he gets upper-handed by a relative Force novice and tricked by his own apprentice. I don't know, I just felt that something was missing. Still, the Snoke throne scene was pretty enjoyable in true Star Wars fashion, as I said before, and the lightsaber battle sequence that followed was, in my opinion, one of the best choreographed and enjoyable to watch in the entire saga. The Praetorian Guard was awesome, and the two very powerful Force users of Rey and Kylo fighting side by side was very cool. Chris Hartwell's opinion on his review does make somewhat of a little bit of sense. He argues that Snoke was just a piece inside the main character's arc, Kylo Ren in this case, just like the Emperor was in the original trilogy for Darth Vader and for Luke Skywalker. I hadn't thought about it like that before I watched his review, but still, if I had first watched The Return of the Jedi without first seeing the entire character development of the Emperor done in the prequels, which I didn't, I would have still have presented as part of criticism towards Return of the Jedi. One thing that I have heard some people, including some of my friends, say is that they believe Snoke might come back in episode 9, and that does make a little bit of sense, mostly because of one detail that I will present further, so I guess we'll just have to wait and see. But honestly, I wouldn't really want for him to come back. I thought Rian Johnson just made a choice, and if J.J. Abrams goes back and tries to correct it, I think the trilogy as a whole will be somewhat worse for it. I have just been talking about the things that I didn't like for the movie for these past few minutes, so I'ma get into the stuff that I actually did like, and some of this stuff actually overwhelms the bad stuff in my opinion. And one of these things that I thought Rian Johnson really did well in this movie, I felt that he did something new. He brought something new to the Star Wars universe while also maintaining similar themes. He did take quite a lot of risk on some choices, and I believe they mostly paid off. One example is how he elaborated on Force powers. I know this is heavily criticized, as some people think that the Force can only do what the movie's shown before, but if you've watched the Clone Wars or really anything else other than the movies, they can show you that the Force isn't really something completely set, and that powers are mostly dynamic. So for example, projection. I thought the projection that Luke did towards the end of the movie was really cool and something that added to the Force mythos. Not sure it's been used before. I don't remember one specific time that it was used, and I would believe it's somewhat similar to Force Ghosts, but I don't know. Another great example, which certainly was a highlight of the movie for me, was the Force Skype thing between Rey and Kylo. I thought it really focused on their great performances and developed an emotional connection between the two characters, a connection that does make sense because they have similar characters in the sense that they both want connections with people because they are both mostly alone in their own struggles. One other thing that I think the movie did really well was the change of character in Luke. I know it's been heavily criticized again by Star Wars fans that believe Luke and his legacy is sacred and can't be touched at all. but I felt the way Luke and his ideal that the Jedi must end, by the beginning of the film at least, was really well done and presented the character in a much more realistic sense. A master that basically gave up hope after his failure, but upon encountering another apprentice, a new apprentice, and getting counsel from an old master, convinced him in the end to fulfill his duty. I thought that whole arc was very meaningful and intelligent, how Rey reignited his hope and duty, and I also really enjoyed the Yoda cameo that portrayed him in his original trilogy roots, comedic but ultimately wise. The movie in a lot of ways, and the whole new trilogy in fact, as has been said many times before, is about the passing of the baton from the old generation to the new, and the Luke storyline really did that fantastically in my opinion. And the way that the Jedi Master just kind of faded after his purpose was completed and became one with the Force was really satisfactory in my opinion. And of course, he's coming back as a Force ghost in episode 9, so I thought it was a fitting semi-end for Luke's story. Even with all these new changes, I still thought the movie rhymed with other Star Wars movies, as it was meant to. And by that I mean it had similar themes, mostly towards Empire Strikes Back. And one of those themes is the hero leaving her master, in this case, which is Rey, her master and her training incomplete, and undertaking her own journey. Only it was a little bit more violent in this time compared to Empire Strikes Back. Another similar theme between the both movies were the hero and the villain tempted to join forces when Kylo lays out his hand and says, "Join me." It was very similar to when Vader laid out his hand to Luke when they were fighting in Bespin and said, "Join me, let's rule the galaxy together." I thought this movie was gonna take it in a different direction and Rey might actually join Kylo Ren, but it didn't, and that's mostly fine. It's back to good versus evil and rebels versus empire basically. Finally, the last similarity between themes of these two movies that I found, and perhaps the most important one, was towards the end, which was taking a blow but rising up again. What I mean by that is that the rebels, and in this case the resistance, really took a blow. They lost mostly everything, their ships, their personnel, most everything, but still they are going to rise up and try to still combat the First Order in episode 9. That's very similar to what happened at the end of episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, when Han Solo was frozen over, Luke was defeated by Vader, but they still managed to escape and rise up for the challenge. Now about Rey's backstory. I honestly don't know how I feel about the big reveal that her parents are basically not important. On the one hand, I really wanted for the saga to move on from the Skywalker bloodline and develop new paths. But on the other hand, I agree when people say that in The Force Awakens there was too much smoke for there to be no fire. Like the previous movie, episode 7 really builds up for a big reveal about her past in this one, episode 8, but it ends up being really nothing. I don't know if Kylo Ren was lying to her to convince her somehow. That seems very unlikely since she kind of agreed with him by searching her true feelings, although that is what I am hoping for a little bit, and maybe episode 9 will correct. Even with that said, I have to agree with Andrei Terbea, sorry if I butchered your name, in his animated semi-review, in which he says that there are many inconsistencies between J.J. Abrams' The Force Awakens and the directions that he took for the Star Wars franchise in that movie, and Rian Johnson's The Last Jedi and the directions that he took. Ultimately, I think we're going to have to wait and see when episode 9 comes out, but still, it does seem likely that the two directors have very different opinions on where Star Wars should go in this new trilogy. In technical terms, I felt The Last Jedi was as good as ever. There were great performances all around, especially on the three main characters of Rey, Luke, and Kylo. The action set pieces, although not that many admittedly, were as always very well thought out, and the lightsaber battles were very well choreographed, especially the Snoke Throne battle sequence, which, as I mentioned before, I really enjoyed. The visuals were also on point, as to be expected in a Star Wars movie. The colors and the sound were authentic. The new planets and creatures were also very inventive for the most part. I thought Crate was great. The whole salt mining and crystal caves were very cool, and the crystal fox creatures as well, Voptics I think they were called, were in my opinion the best new creature the movie provided. The island in Arc 2, however, although very interesting and one could say beautiful regarding landscape, I thought it kinda looked like Ireland with a landscape, and I think it was in Ireland that they filmed it, I don't know though. Anyway, I thought the creatures, however, were mostly lackluster on the island, as they were basically there either to sell toys like the porgs, or to lighten up the mood of the movie, like those weird marine mammal things that Luke gets milk from, and the cleaners and the caretakers of the temple as well. I think Lanai is what they're called. They mostly serve to provide light and laughable moments, sometimes contrasting too much, not in a good way unfortunately, with important and tense scenes in the movie. Speaking on the humor in the movie, one of the most universally disliked features, I might be just already used to the Disney live action humor most commonly associated with the Marvel movies, but also present in other films, but the humor in this movie wasn't that much of a problem for me throughout it. I know that kind of contradicts with what I just said about the creatures, but in general, I felt it didn't detract that much from the experience. Only in a few scenes I thought it really hampered the overall tone of a couple of them. Case in point, the shirtless Kylo scene that actually became a really spicy meme, in which Rey quips in the middle of a really emotional moment between the two characters as she asks why he hated and killed his father. Nevertheless, this really wasn't a problem that hampered my experience too much, as I said, but this next one was. The biggest problem that I found in The Last Jedi, apart from the extremely stupid Leia Space Superman scene, was the Finn and Rose side plot. I felt the whole side plot was pretty useless, with them going after a codebreaker which ended up not even being the way that they fixed the problem of the resistant fleet in pursuit. That whole subplot contained the worst scenes of the movie in my opinion, except the Leia scene, and felt pretty disconnected from everything else, such as the chase sequence in Canto Bight that really felt out of place and unexplained. I know it served the purpose of teaching a lesson to Finn, basically that there is good worth fighting for, mostly by Rose herself, but there barely even was character development on Rose, so for me it was pretty meaningless. Another point that people have brought up to justify the inclusion of that whole Canto Bight sequence was to prepare the path for the new generation of Jedi to be trained, cause Rose gives the Jedi ring, the ring with the Jedi symbol, to the kid taking care of one of the alien horses, one of the Fathiers that they use and everything, and that is probably correct, since it seems that the other Star Wars trilogy that Rian Johnson has been signed on to direct will probably be about this new generation. Even if that is the case, it could have been done in a different way for sure, and not presented into a frankly boring and lackluster side plot. Another thing that bothered me about this whole storyline was how quickly Rose fell in love with Finn after she tried arresting him. Their quote-unquote love also garnered some pretty cringy and eye-rolling scenes in my opinion as well. One in particularly that bothered me was when Rose saved Finn from sacrificing himself towards the end of the movie, and then delivered that ridiculous line of, "It's not fighting what we hate, it's saving what we love that will save the galaxy somehow," which really makes no sense. The scene made even less sense because to save him, Rose crashed both of their speeders in the very foot of the First Order walkers, so how they survived that, I have no idea. And the movie actually has more cringy one-liners than this one, and most of them are contained in this subplot. Examples are, "Now it was worth it" when they saved those 5 years, and "Let's go Chrome Dome" when Finn fights with Captain Phasma. One good thing, however, that I think the side plot served for was the introduction of the interesting character of DJ, played by Benicio del Toro. He kinda has that sly Han Solo vibe, but I felt he was a much needed reality check on the whole movie and was given enough screen time to accomplish his role of showing that things aren't really that simple in the Star Wars universe. He brought a really interesting human theme to the movie, in my opinion, which was that not everything is black and white. There are grays in the Star Wars universe as there are grays in real life. Star Wars has never shown in a feature movie this theme before. It did in the Clone Wars, watch it, it's really great. And his studying also was an interesting character design choice, in my opinion. But even with the inclusion of DJ, the side plot also contributed to a big cinematic problem of the film, which has been criticized all over the place, and that is the pacing problem. So I won't elaborate that much on it because it has been criticized so much, but towards the middle of the film, the movie really loses momentum, and it does so very fast, even beginning to drag at some points, especially the casino sequences, where I would just think, just please go back to Luke and Rey. We had way too much time focused on the fleet and its problems, while the interesting parts to me were Luke, Rey, and Kylo. The entire premise of the fleet chase plot also presents some problems, primarily regarding the Poe and Admiral Holdo subplot. I agree with, I think it was Hello Greedo that said in one of his review vids of the movie that Holdo wasn't really necessary as a character and could have been easily replaced for Leia, especially in the Lightspeed sacrifice scene, which would have carried a much greater emotional impact on the audience if it was Leia. She could have even been replaced by Akbar, solving the problem that I mentioned at the very beginning of this video of his completely disappointing death. I also don't really understand why Holdo had to keep her plan a secret from Poe and the other resistance fighters. Was it because he was believed to be too brash? I've heard this explanation before, but it doesn't hold up because when the plan was presented to him, he completely agreed. I think it was on a Forbes contributor review that he argued the movie should have ditched the entire fleet chase and spent more time on Crate, and I kinda have to agree. Okay, we're approaching the end of the video and I just want to touch upon one last problem that I saw in this film, and I think it's a problem that is definitely recurring of the Star Wars saga, and that is the lack of sense of scale. It's really hard to explain, but I feel that everything that happens in this immense universe, in this immense galaxy, is for and by these few characters and factions that act in the movie. I think the movie Rogue One solved that problem greatly, as did the Clone Wars TV show, where characters and their arcs fit inside this greater breathing universe with its own big believable problems. But anyway, that is a problem that many action and adventure films suffer from, as it is very hard to achieve this feeling of a breathing universe on just a feature-length project. Finally, one last thing that I wish to touch upon in this video about the movie is the details that I found in my second, third, and fourth viewings of the movie that really caught my attention. And there are two types of these details in the movies. Bad details that caused more confused questions than anything, and good details that incited curiosity in mostly a good way. One of those bad details that really didn't make that much sense, but I know it's Star Wars and Star Wars doesn't really follow physics, but is how did those bombs from the bombers in the very first sequence of the movie dropped into that dreadnought, I think was called. There's no gravity in space. How did the bombs drop? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. One other thing was the Millennium Falcon dice thing that Luke got from the Millennium Falcon when it was on the Arc 2, and we've never seen that before. What was that gold dice thing? It's never been shown before, and in the movie it's brought to have a super big emotional connection with Han and the Millennium Falcon, and then he even projects it towards Leia. It's just really weird. It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, one good detail that really enhanced the scene when I first watched it was Snoke force pushing across the galaxy on Hux after he got defeated by Poe and his squadron in blowing up the dreadnought after they were trying to escape the planet where the resistance base was. But anyway, it really shows the power of Snoke, that he can push people down across the galaxy using the force. Later he is shown throwing Rey around, which is already a powerful force user. Really shows Snoke's power, but eventually that really doesn't mean that much because he gets killed. Another good detail is when, after talking with Rey with that force Skype thing, there's water on Kylo's glove from the island in Arc 2. I thought that was a cool detail that elaborated on their force connection, and it maybe served as foreshadowing for the future force projection that Luke does later in the movie. Another cool detail that I found is when General Hux tries to kill Kylo Ren, when he finds him laying in the floor after the lightsaber and lightspeed explosion in the Snoke's throne room. Hux reaches for something inside his coat when he sees him laying on the floor, and I interpreted that as Hux seeing an opportunity to kill Kylo Ren and become the Supreme Leader. And if that is the correct interpretation, it's very interesting to see the conflict between the two leader positions in the First Order after the death of Snoke. Another detail is at the very end of the movie when we find out that the books are still in the Falcon, so maybe Yoda knew that when he blew up the ancient tree just to save the ancient Jedi texts. Another one is when Rey is still connected to Kylo. We see that at the very end of the movie too, when she is looking down from the Millennium Falcon and Kylo looks up, and the sense that we get is that they're still connected and they still see each other. So maybe Snoke didn't die, or he was lying when he said it was him that made the connection between them. And lastly, the very final detail on the very final scene of the movie is when the kid with the Jedi symbol ring pulls the broom that he uses to I forgot the word for brooming, whatever. He pulls the broom with force, and it shows that the kid is somewhat force sensitive, proving the theory that that might be the new generation of Jedi to be trained. With all of those presented problems, in the end, I still think all of the negative things about the movie were kind of ignored, as all the characters came together in one of the best and most epic battles of Star Wars history. And as I said before, on the death of Luke and the theme of rising up again with hope, the ending was pretty satisfying for me, leaving me excited, although a bit worried, with the huge task that J.J. Abrams has with directing Episode 9. Okay, so with all of that being said, I give this movie the score of 7.5. Like I said, in general terms, I enjoyed the movie. felt it did justice to the Star Wars universe while also bringing innovation on themes, actions, and perspectives. That is why it has this higher end score of a movie with so many problems, as I mentioned. As I said in the very beginning, I left the movie theater the first time I watched it very awestruck, believing it was one of the best Star Wars movies ever made. I would have probably given it a score of 8.5 or even perhaps a 9 at that time because I liked it so much. But upon further examination of all the problems presented here, I landed at this score, which certainly presents the movie as a strong and recommendable Star Wars flick, but far from the greatness of Empire Strikes Back or even the original Star Wars, due to its many problems. In the end, I just think the movie tried to do too much and managed to do the most important things right, but some of the less important things not so much. I think that the movie brought a great lot of discussion of human themes in a not very neatly packed but mostly enjoyable Star Wars experience, and for that this movie lands at a 7.5, even though it has a great many problems. I also have to agree again with Hello Greedo. All the links to the videos I am mentioning and others will be posted on the description, by the way, if you're interested in that. I agree with him that much of the criticism that this movie is getting could have been made of the original trilogy as well. That doesn't mean that those criticisms are not valid, but it does mean, at least for me, that they did not ruin the original movies and they do not ruin this one. On the topic of other Star Wars films, I thought I'd give you my complete list of the Star Wars movies from better to worse. I know it's cliche and most Star Wars fans have this opinion, but Empire is my number one, a truly cinematic masterpiece that greatly elaborated on its predecessor, which in turn is on the second spot on my top list, although I feel some later renditions pose greater positive qualities and A New Hope suffers from some problems. The sheer immense impact and mark this movie has left in cinematic history cements its spot as number 2 on my list. At number 3, I have Rogue One, mostly because of the innovative tone I felt this movie brought to the franchise, a serious, more somber and less forgiving feel of a war movie inside the Star Wars universe. Up next is Episode 6 on number 4 and this movie on number 5, Episode 8. Return of the Jedi is certainly the weakest of the original trilogy due to the many problems it posed, but I feel it did its job in closing the trilogy and succeeded in the most important points. That is somewhat of the feeling that I have for The Last Jedi as well. Many problems, but a sense of accomplishment in general. After that, there's The Force Awakens, which I certainly enjoyed as a content-hungry Star Wars fan would when it came out, but I felt it played too safe and relied too much on previous storylines. It was basically A New Hope reskinned, to be honest, to be placed any higher on the list. After come the dreaded prequels, in the order of Episode 3 first, followed by Episode 1 and then by Attack of the Clones. All three of the prequels have similar huge problems, and that is why they are regarded by me and most other fans as the worst Star Wars movies, but I feel Revenge of the Sith is the best one, mostly because it closes off the trilogy by clearing mysteries set even by the original trilogy, completing the missing pieces of the poem in my opinion. It still has god-awful acting on behalf of Hayden Christensen, Jar Jar and the many other problems so tirelessly scrutinized. Problems that make Episode 2 land last on the list, only slightly worse than A Phantom Menace, mostly because of the truly horrible and devoid of emotion performances by the main characters, except Obi-Wan. I liked Obi-Wan on the movie. And the clones. Oh god, the clones were bad in that movie. And also because Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul were on A Phantom Menace. This is my current list and is probably subject to change in the future, but as of now, this is how the Star Wars movies rank up in my opinion. Alright guys, that is going to be it for me on this Star Wars review video here. It turned out a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I posted a video Monday with Battlefront 2 gameplay as well, talking about what I planned for this channel in 2018, as well as some other stuff, so check that out if you want to know more about me and this channel. There's also a playlist in the description and in the cards with my other English videos, so be sure to check those out. Other than that, leave a like and subscribe if you want to do any of that, but most importantly, leave a comment down below on how you think I can improve. Alright, this is me done talking. See you guys later. Peace.